$200, a Super Nintendo setup costs twice as much as the old system. For the money, the company promises better pictures, sound, and adventure. Now you're playing with power, superpower. You're the king, I tell you! The king!
Only for Super NES. Only on Super NES. You're listening to the SNES podcast with your host, Soul Blazer.
Hello, everybody. This is the Super NES podcast, episode number 165 this time. As always, this is Greg, joined by Joe. And we are once again honored to have a guest host on the podcast. Somebody's been on the podcast for a couple of times, but it's been a couple times already, but it's been a while, so we're glad to have him back on here. I'm very pleased to have back on the podcast Chris from numerous podcasts of his own, which he will tell us about here toward the end of the podcast, I'm sure. But anyway, Chris, glad to have you back on the podcast.
Welcome,
again.
Chris.
Get my guns, Mo.
But anyway, yeah. So how have you been?
I've been great. I've been busy doing all manner of stuff for Stone Age Gamer, making videos and podcasts and writing about stuff. I just, lost my mind with E3, and this is fun. This is my first time as a professional games writer working during E3, because I got my job writing for Nintendo Force last year, like a full time, and E3 didn't happen. So this year, it was really kind of fun. We all got a bunch of assignments. Like as soon as the show was over, like, all right, we got to get these in. We go to print on Friday, so we got to get stuff in. And I was very fortunate. I got to do the preview for Metroid Dread, which was like, it was kind of amazing. Like I got to do the Nintendo Force preview for Metroid Dread, and I just. That was quite an experience, but no, I'm doing great. I'm very happy to be here and talk about Tin Star, or should I not say that? I don't know.
No, that's fine.
It's supposed to be a surprise. I don't remember.
Right. Yeah. No. Definitely. So, like, a few months ago, I was trying to get people lined up for the podcast, and so I approached Chris and asked him what game he wanted to cover, and he's like, well, I want to cover this game. And I'm like, what? Never heard of it. So, despite this game being published by Nintendo, it just totally slipped on my radar for some reason. I never heard of it. So,
I would venture a guess that this is probably the most overlooked Nintendo published title. It's definitely on that platform, maybe on any platform.
Agreed.
I might argue that behind, so I might argue that the pinball game, like Beyond the Mask, maybe a little bit more overlooked than this is. But,
Super Pinball, that's a good call. Although Super Pinball did get a re-release.
That's true, it did. So, but so definitely, so Tin Star. Just to go over the the rough details of the game first, was developed by a company called Software Creations, who was a British company. It was published by Nintendo. Curiously enough, despite the fact this game was developed by a British company, it only got released in North America. So, did not get a European release, not get a Japanese release. So that's another reason this game probably is not like super well known. This game came out in November of 1994. So, Software Creations was a long-running, pretty good overall, I'd say, company for games. Their track record is pretty solid. They were around from 1985 to 2004. They started off basically doing games for the British computers like the BBC, and then they got tapped to do a lot of ports of arcade games, which is how they became to be known for most of the 80s and 90s before the company branched out. They're probably best known for making games based off the Marvel Comics series. Cutthroat Island, they made a game based off the movie, which was pretty well regarded. Beauty and the Beast they made, which is also a pretty well regarded game. And they also created the cult favorite Solstice on the NES and its sequel Equinox on Super NES. So those are the games you probably best know Software Creations from. This was actually the second game that they that they did that was published by Nintendo. The first game that they did was also published by Nintendo. That game was Ken Griffey Jr. Presents Major League Baseball, which I remember being at the time being a pretty good baseball game. I've not played it in a long time, but I remember when it came out, it was a pretty solid game because the Super NES was not known for sports.
Yeah,
games,
it's still a pretty solid game.
Yeah. So anyway, for some reason, the game sold well. Software Creations was equal to a sequel, but for some reason, Nintendo decided to give the sequel project to Rare instead. So they kind of said, well, as consolation prize, you guys can work on 10 Star instead. So that's how this game came to be they're created. So anyway, now that I got the basics of the game covered here, Chris, since you're the one most familiar with this game, why don't you talk about some of the gameplay aspects, and why you love this game so much?
Well, there's you probably. I feel like a lot of people have probably seen this game and don't realize it, because the way I found out about the game in the first place was from the post Donkey Kong Country Play It Loud poster that came with every Super Nintendo game. This game was on there. And that's how I found out about it, because that screenshot looks amazing. And what you see in that screenshot is something that looks like it's some sort of side-scrolling platformer type thing. It's you see the little character, and there's other characters on the screen. Like, okay, I'm in. Let's go for it. So I go to the store and I buy the game, and it has the Super Scope logo on it. It's like, oh, I have a Super Scope. This is pretty awesome. So I'll get it and try it out. Tin Star is a very unique game. It is ultimately a, let's say, light gun game, I guess. Target shooting would really be the most accurate description of this game, but it does so in a number of different manners. Every stage has something to do with shooting targets, but sometimes it's like an arcade target shooting thing where like the camera is moving back and forth and different things pop up on the screen. You got to shoot the bad guys and not shoot the good guys, and you can, break stuff in the backgrounds of the environments. Or other stages are where you actually see the character of Tin Star walking around on the screen, and wherever you shoot with the cursor, he shoots with his guns, and it's pretty neat. It still plays ultimately like a target shooting game, but it has this almost sort of adventurous feel to it because you see the character platforming through the stage that you're shooting in the whole time. And then there are quick draw segments, which are some of my favorites, that are just they handled the process of doing a quick draw, I think, very cleverly, depending on what controller you use. What's very strange about this game is that, like I said, it is a target shooting game, and it is compatible with the Super Scope. So out of the box, you can move a cursor around your screen with your D-pad on your Super Nintendo controller and shoot whatever you like. But if you've ever played a game like that before, that's kind of crappy. It's not really a fun way to play a target shooting game. You want to be able to shoot something with some level of precision, so you can use the Super Scope. However, the Super Scope, by its nature, draws your attention to a small circle. It blocks out some of your frame of vision, your field of view. That's the terminology. Ha, there it is. That's kind of by its nature, and that's not really great for this game. But the game is also compatible with the Super NES mouse that came with Mario Paint, and that is how you play this game. Because if you're playing with the Super NES mouse, this game is, pun very much intended, a blast. It gives you the exact kind of control you would want, just moving a cursor around the screen, and doing those quick draw segments, especially the really hard ones later in the game, become actually doable because you can move your hand. You get I'll explain them real quick. You get a character across the screen that you're staring at, and then everything is in first person, right? So you see your hand, and then just at a random interval, you'll see the word draw appear on the screen. And in one of the four corners of the screen, the little, what do you call that? The barrel, not the barrel of the gun, where all the bullets are kept. I don't understand guns. I don't do guns. The round thingy in the old cowboy shoot 'em up shooters that have the bullets in them, that'll appear in one of the corners, and then you have to shoot that to draw the gun, and then shoot the guy before he can shoot you. And with anything other than the Super NES mouse, those are a nightmare. But with the mouse, it's really, really cool. But so that's the basic gameplay elements, whereas the story is it takes place in the Wild East instead of the Wild West, and you are everything's robots. Everything's your trusty horse Aluminum is a robot. You, Tin Star, are a robot. Your sidekick Mo everything's robots. and it's got a very The Tick kind of sense of humor to it. There's a lot of dialogue in the game, and it's legitimately pretty funny stuff. Not everything is a hit, but there are definitely some jokes in there that still make me actually actively laugh when I see them. And it's got a lot of really good visual gags. It's got gorgeous visuals. It is a very bright and well animated game. It's really very Super Nintendo, like really doing the Super Nintendo justice with the color representation. And I also adore this game's soundtrack. It's got wonderful music. And only half a shameless plug here, because there's actually rather informational. I host a video game music podcast. When we did the episode on this show, I also got to interview one of the composers. And he shed all kinds of light on the development of the game and stuff. I've already forgotten most of the details, but it was a fascinating interview. So if you want to learn more about this game after we talk about it, find my Waveback episode. I actually talked to somebody who helped work on this game, which I don't think a lot of people can say, because who knows what Tin Star is besides us.
Well, yeah, because... Okay, yeah, so just to add some observations to that, there's that. So during my research, I found that I found there were 3 composers credited for this game. So who'd you actually interview?
You know what? I don't remember. Let me look that up.
There was Chris Jojo, Matthew Cannon, and Sadi.
Matthew Cannon, that was the one. Yes,
okay,
we interviewed Matthew
Sadi
Cannon.
Rava, who credited with the music for this game. So, oh yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I definitely have to check that out. So, yeah, so that was a very good summary, like about the game, for sure. So, a couple observations myself. I thought this game as being more of a rail shooter. I mean, like, you know, I know that there's third-person perspectives as well as first-person perspectives, which is not technically strictly a rail shooter, but rail shooter seems to be the easiest way, like, to pigeonhole the gameplay, as far as it goes. So, and yeah, the fact this game's compatible with all 3 control methods. You know, the controller, the Super Scope, and the mouse is awesome, and it was the first game to do that. And as far as I could find, the only game in Super NES to do that, to have support for all 3 controllers. So, and I was going to say, I thought mouse was going to be the best way to play this game. I'm glad to hear that you confirmed that, because, yeah, some of the parts with the controller can definitely be frustrating.
Oh, yeah, no, I hated, when I first got the game, when I started playing it with the controller, I was like, nah, this isn't going to work. And then when I switched to the Super Scope, not only does it you know, cut off your field of vision, but it also kind of puts a weird red tint across the screen, which I'm assuming is supposed to be like, because it's your first, you're looking through the Super Scope like you're one of the robots, I guess. I don't know, it's a weird effect, and I'm not entirely sure why it's there, but that also hurt it a lot. But man, when I plugged in that Super NES mouse, that is how you play this game. Just get a controller extension, and you're good to go.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. Well, I think part of the problem is I think part of the problem is like Super Scope itself, because I never actually bought one back then, but I did play at a friend's house, and I just didn't think it was accurate or as fun to use as the Zapper was, like on the NES. I think the Super Scope was not as great of a design gun as the Zapper was, unfortunately. So
that's interesting to hear you say that. That was one of the things I liked most about the Super Scope was its accuracy, because I spent a ton of time with Battle Clash and its sequel, Metal Combat, are just... They're two.
Those games are so tough.
Those are good games.
They're excellent, and the Super Scope really, those are the showcase for the Super Scope, because that limited field of vision is incredibly important to the atmosphere of the game, but also the precision because of the way that it aims. Like, you have that cursor right there in the middle. That is so integral to that game, because so much of that game is about shooting specific points on those STs that you're fighting against, the standing tanks. God, I love Battle Clash. So to hear you say that you didn't like the accuracy of it, I wonder if there was something wrong with the initial calibration or something, because it did have that receiver on top of the TV that you had to get. You had to kind of place that in the right position in order to make it work. And it is a shame that stuff like this doesn't really work on modern televisions. Because the Super Scope is such a unique experience because of the way it limits your vision. And the 6 games that came with it are pretty nifty, and Yoshi's Safari is kind of cool. But man, Battle Clash 1 and 2 are an experience. They're like Punch-Out with guns. It's so weird. And this is another one of the... I really wanted to like this game with the Super Scope because of how much I like that peripheral, and the way that it works when it works well is so unique. But this game is just not suited for it. It's like... It reminds me a lot of stuff like Operation Wolf, and I found it fascinating that you said rail shooter, because that's I never really thought about that, because you're never in control of your character. But looking at the game on those stages where Tin Star is moving around on his own, like jumping from building to building or riding on the back of a carriage and like jumping on top of horses and stuff, it really does feel like a rail shooter. And I've never noticed that before, because it's always struck me as like Cabal or Operation Wolf, where you're just shooting because you're always just moving the target.
Yeah.
But those stages when the character is actually on screen doing the actions that you're doing, like the fact that he always shoots like where you're shooting, I thought was just such a super cool touch. And you never really see that in games like that, where you have the character that you're technically controlling, even though you have no control over him on the screen the whole time. Yeah. Really does give it that kind of rail shooter flavor. That's a really fascinating observation.
Well, I also thought it was. Well, thank you. Well, I also thought it was fascinating to me that you actually, you mentioned 2 of the 4 games that this game Tin Star really reminds me about, because I definitely thought of, so I was definitely reminded of Cabal and like Operation Wolf playing this. I also was reminded about Lethal Enforcers and Sunset Riders.
Yeah.
So, but there's definitely a lot of unique things in this game. Most of them pretty good. So a couple things I don't as much care for, but they're definitely, you can at least say the developers tried to make a lot of unique things happen in this game, and I think for the most part they've succeeded. That whole part about you're not actually controlling the character, you're like, instead of like you're shooting for him or to support him, is definitely like a unique thing about it. The gameplay is also pretty unique in the sense that the game is set up into like 7 days, from like Monday through Sunday, and there's like a number of there's a number of stages. There's a number of stages like in each game. Each day starts off with like a shooting contest, where like trying to hit bottles thrown in the air or whatnot. So then you have a bit of plot. Then you have your first stage, then bit of plot, then more stage. Yeah. Well, I say a bit of plot because it is short.
The game revolves around you accidentally ruined the head of the bad oil gang. You accidentally stepped on his prize-winning geranium. Yeah. So the whole thing is revenge over you accidentally destroying a flower.
Yes, exactly.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So the game is sort of like 31 stages all together. There are also things you can find or do in the game that also will affect gameplay. For example, the game is there's a very unique scoring system that this game has, which is like for every stage you're given points depending upon how well you do or don't do during certain things. So like bullets wasted, accuracy, amount of damage that you took, and and what's called like secret bonus stage points. So and then in the stage those points turn to dollar amounts, and there's only one difficulty level, but the ending you get in the game depends upon how much money you have at the end of the game. So you either can get like a bad ending, a normal ending, or a good ending. All based upon how much money you have. That's pretty, and that's pretty unique. This is not the only game that has ending control by points, but it is definitely one of the most interesting ways of doing it. There's also a hidden bonus stage you can get that you can access like in a stage. If you try enough scenery in each stage, you get what's called secret bonus points. And you can also access a hidden stage where you're trying to, like, there's this girl stuck to like a spinning star, and you're trying to shoot the stars around her to score extra points. Which, by the way, for a kid-themed game, that girl is kind of interesting looking.
She's a robot. There's nothing to see.
I was just surprised to see that like in the kids. Again, there's like style toward kids. So, there's also you also can access that by not refilling your hit points. There are canteens scattered around that you can use to gain hit points. But if you don't shoot the hit points, you can access the that bonus spinning disc stage like the end. So, also this game has a save system. It's a very unique save system. There are room for 3 saves, but in order to make a save, you have to like pay for it. You have to like buy it. So it's not a lot of money to start off with, as you go through the game, the amount of money that you need the amount of money that you need to use to save the game increases a lot. So it's fine if you're playing the game and don't really care about the ending, but if you're trying to get like the best ending of the game, you don't want to lose any money at all to do that, because it's because I at least found it to be very tough to get requirements to get the best ending of the game, and you don't want to like lose money by doing that. So it puts this game like the weird category of like kind of long to sit through in one sitting, kind of short to have a save system in it. So it's a very weird, at least to me, kind of not quite either way kind of like game because of that. So most of the walkthroughs I found on YouTube say about an hour and a half is the average for going through this game. Like we were playing through it like nonstop.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, too long.
Which is fun to do.
Yeah. I'm just not a fan of that save system. It's like, just like give us a regular save system. They don't make us like pay for it. I've never been a fan of games that did that.
Yeah, when you have weird, you always got to wonder about stuff like that. Where I'm reminded of like that Chibi Robo Ziplash game, where it's like that's a perfectly fine and enjoyable game, except for the fact that you have to like luck into being able to actually play the next stage of the game. Like, it's infuriating when otherwise good games have these just really bizarre mechanics that like make you wonder, why did you do that? Who thought this was fun?
Right. So I thought that was one of the weak points about the game. But most of the things about this game that they did try, I thought like worked like pretty well. So, Joe, we've not given you much of a chance to talk yet. Sorry
Good.
about that. What's your thoughts about the game overall?
People who have been listening to the podcast for a while will know that I am usually kind of the opposite. I play the devil's advocate very well. My first impressions of this game when I started it up was, this is Wild Guns, but it's like Saturday morning cartoon style with the humor of things like Boogerman and Earthworm Jim.
Wild Gun's another good comparison.
Yeah, like
I didn't think about that game, but you're right.
The minute I started up playing that first stagecoach area, that's the first thing that came to mind was Wild Guns. It's just, less frantic.
Yes.
I did not get to use the Super Scope, which is terribly disappointing, because I would have loved to have the opportunity to at least play the game that way. But I found both the mouse and controller, for me, once I turned the sensitivity up in the settings, both worked great. I actually used the controller for most of my playthrough, and when I was using the mouse is quicker, and I definitely agree mouse is probably the best way to play. But don't count out the controller, because if you have the sensitivity turned up, doing those quick draws, you can actually get to the cylinder for the bullet chamber and get to the enemy and make that shot no problem. Other than that, the sound effects were okay, but unfortunately I felt like the music was forgettable. Like, half the time I didn't even hear the music, which, I mean, I don't know. Like, it didn't pop out at me. I'm not saying that it's horrible. It's just, it was forgettable. I mean, it's sad, because there were some decent tunes, and I love that sound, that whole like Wild West theme. But for me personally, I just didn't see anything that stuck out. And then
that's a bummer. I've been humming those tunes ever since this game came out.
Well, I'm about to make you upset even more. So
nah, that's okay.
So a little backstory for here. So the past like week and a half, I've gone back and really played my Saturn. So for the past week, I have gone through and I ended up beating Virtual Cop and Virtual Cop 2. So I've been playing quite a bit of light gun games with a controller. This game was too long. Period. End of story. That being said,
100% agree.
That being said,
100% agree.
That being said, I did like the fact that you could save it. Granted, it cost you, And like, Greg pointed out, you were going to miss out on, the best ending, and that whole like money and endings, like that drives me nuts. That drove me nuts with DuckTales on the NES. Like that's,
Oh God.
yeah,
that's the
it's
worst.
like, come on, just, give me one ending, and like, if you want to give me different endings, like the way I shot the boss at the end, like change it. Like if I shot him in the foot, give me the bad ending. I mean, something like that. I don't know. So, I mean, in the end, I just felt the game was really repetitive. I honestly got bored. Sorry, Chris.
No. You're these are valid concerns.
I played the game.
You see it. You play the game like 4 or 5 times before you finish it because they only have like those certain number of
Right.
stages, and then they keep repeating
Yeah.
those. And you're 100% right. Like I understand. You can kind of understand why they did it. Like they've got to pad the game
Right,
out because
right.
you're selling this home console game. It's not just an arcade game. You don't want to beat it in like a half an hour. But I honestly feel like it would have been better if they really either added more stages or just chopped it down to like maybe play each type of stage twice.
Right. Yeah.
Instead of like 4 or 5 times. Because, yeah, you're 100% right. By the end, it's super long in the tooth. You're not seeing new things
Yeah,
anymore. Maybe a new sprite here or there, but
I
yeah.
played 45 minutes, and like, don't get me wrong, like the story had its moments where like, there was some humor there, especially the whole, the blue lady, like kind of nudges him and he falls backwards and knocks over the plant and that whole thing. And then of course he eventually gets replaced because he's a bad sheriff, or it's like I get it. Like, there's humor there. It's there for kids, it's not for us. So I get it. But like I said, like it's like Virtual Cop and Virtual Cop 2 that I played only a week ago, half hour at the most, and I had one of those games beat. And that's the right, I think, amount of time for a shooter like this. And
I concur.
I enjoyed it for the 45 minutes that I played, but I'll be the first to admit, like, as soon as like I died and I was like dead, I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna go to YouTube and watch the rest of it, because I did not want to restart it and go through it again. And I should have been using save states, and I wasn't. But yeah, I mean, I went back and I did play a little bit of it, and I will admit, with infinite health and infinite bullets and just going crazy and shooting everything, can be fun. There's some fun to be had. But yeah, just it's too long. I couldn't recommend this to well, I could recommend it because you'll find out it's relatively inexpensive, and if you emulate it, like I said, with the controller and the sensitivity turned up, it's fun with the controller and whatnot. It's just, it wasn't my cup of tea. Which is too bad.
Yeah, I don't want to...
Because you were right. Like, it's got, like, the humor of the tick. As soon as you said the humor of the tick, I was literally sitting here going, that's what I was thinking of, and I could not find it. And you're absolutely right. Like, there's definitely a nugget of, like, there's a really good game here. But, like I said,
yeah,
cut it down a bit, and you got gold.
I loved its ambition, and that is definitely something, even when I was younger, and I loved the game so much because I just loved looking at it so much. Even for somebody like me who really enjoyed it, it definitely got repetitive, and it definitely overstays its welcome, which is a flaw, but one that I would have loved to see corrected in the future.
Yeah.
I just loved this world so much, and I thought the thing that really killed me on this game, like absolutely, like, okay, I will never forget this game, was there was a stage where all of the Bad Oil Gang, the big burly guys, are dressed up as women. And before the stage starts, your sidekick comes in and says, "Hey, Tin Star, there's a bunch of women. There's a bunch of women shooting up the town. What are you doing?" He's like, "I'm reading my good guy Code of the West." It's like, "Well, what for?" "I'm looking for loopholes, of course." There, I found it. And see, here it says, "Never shoot women and children." Okay, and so these are just women on their own. Get my guns, Mo. sold. That joke is funny.
Right, and that's a prime example of the humor that I love in this game. And I wish this game would have got a sequel, to be honest, because I think with a sequel they could have improved a lot of what was missing here and maybe shortened it, and we could have had an even better game.
Exactly. Either shorten it or add more variety. Like those are your two options. Like, because by the end of it, like, I know which spots you can shoot in every single level, and it's just the same stages repeating but harder. And there's only so much fun to be had in that. Like, it's good, but you know, think of, like we mentioned, Battle Clash. Battle Clash is like a third of this game's length, if even that. And I've played through that game dozens of times, but just not in the same sitting, you know, because I'll just sit down, beat that game start to finish, and it's phenomenal. And it's still fantastic to play to this day. Tin Star, I do go back to less, but when I do, I never finish the game. I haven't finished the game since I was a kid and I played through it, because, like, who's going to do that again? But on that same note, I do heartily recommend this game because of how interesting it is. It looks amazing. Like, you want to see Super Nintendo use color and animation in just glorious ways, this is a really great showcase of that. And even if you don't finish it, the time you spend with it will be memorable, which is why it gets my recommendation. I am super bummed to hear you didn't super dig the music, though. I love the instrumentation. It's so sharp in this Super Nintendo game. It doesn't sound like you're... You know, because it is effectively a rail shooter, like Greg said, and so you're not using so much. You've got all this extra bandwidth to really focus on high-quality instruments, so it sounds super sharp. But, man, when you turn this game on, it's so loud in the stark red background, and you just hear that. It's like, that was just like, oh, man, this is going to be... I'm in for a good time here. This is going to be great.
I agree.
So.
When you first turn it on and you get that title screen, I was super hyped, and I love the music there. But then, like I said, when I was playing the levels, I heard the sound effects, which, like I said, aren't that great, over everything else, and it just, like I said, I could, you know, it was like the music just didn't stick with me, unfortunately.
Well, you know what? Attempt to listen to it on its own.
I will. I will actually look up your podcast so that I can hear that.
Removed from the game, it's a... You know, I don't know. It's hard to say, because it's been my understanding that people experience music very differently. And it's a weird tangent, but we just did, on the same podcast, we just covered Sonic the Hedgehog for its anniversary. And... you know, I've played Sonic the Hedgehog a handful of times. You know, it's a great game. I've finished it, but this was the first. Actually, doing it on the podcast was the first time I'd ever, and I've heard, you know, had the music on in the background. But this is the first time I'd ever really concentrated on the music. Like, I'm doing nothing else but actively listening to this music, totally removed from its source material, and it took on a very. I noticed a lot of different things about it, and doing a podcast like that focuses on game music has that effect on me a lot of just like. Removing game music that I've always enjoyed but never listened to on its own really kind of helps you appreciate a bit more of what it is. So, like, where I would play through Tin Star and there were like 2 or 3 songs that always really stuck with me that I just thought were really catchy. In particular in Tin Star, like the I don't even know how to explain it. It's used in a couple of stages, but it's also used on the when they're showing you like the next day song. That one really stuck with me, and then listening to it later, you know, in the distant future when we can actually listen to video game soundtracks, because, like, you know, when I was a kid, I was holding up a tape recorder to my TV speakers and listening to them that way. But you know, now that I can listen to the whole things, they're really interesting compositions, and this game's fascinating. It's so fascinating on so many levels, because it's like. Clearly a lot of thought went into this game. Nintendo published it. It was on the darn poster, included in like every game, but nobody heard about it, and nobody remembers it. It's so strange to me that that's the case. But I guess that's the, you know, shooters like that really do get overlooked. I mean, Battle Clash even got a sequel, but nobody talks about Battle Clash anymore. Or like nobody talked about it when it came out. It's those kinds of things I do. Like Gumshoe on NES. What a fascinating little game! It's a platformer you control with a darn zapper, but nobody talks about it. It's I it's a genre of game that I think gets overlooked quite a lot.
Yeah, I had a choice between either getting like Gumshoe or Hogan's Alley, like Zapper, and I ended up getting like Hogan's Alley. So I mean, like it is what it is. But
and Hogan's Alley's
I was
super
going to
cool.
say, you made a good choice.
Yeah, you made a solid choice. Gumshoe is definitely more interesting than it is good, but it's got a killer Hip Tanaka soundtrack, and it is super interesting.
yeah. So yeah, so you guys actually summarize the good and bad points that most reviewers reviews of this game, both contemporary and now, have talked about. So in a way, so it's like the way you already did my work for me on that front. So thank you.
Happy to be of service.
So I kind of stand no shock. I'm kind of like in the middle of the road like this game. I don't love it as much as Chris. I didn't hate it as much as like Joe did. I thought that, like I said before, I thought that the game has some interesting ideas. Not all of them are executed correctly, I thought, but like I do think the game. It was done by experienced programmers who they already done several Super NES games by this point, so like they knew what they're doing. Experienced programmers who tried some different ideas, and I give them credit for it. It's a very unique game. Maybe it doesn't hit on all cylinders. But then, of course, a lot of games that are considered unique and kind of cult favorites these days didn't always do very well or sell very well like they first came out. So I guess you kind of lump this game like in that group. But yeah, the graphics are gorgeous. I mean, definitely the graphics are definitely like a highlight of this game. It's funny. The controls, they handle well enough. Like Joe said, I think if you just change the controller to be sensitive, the controller's fine. It's not great, but I suspect the mouse is the best way to play the game with. So thank you for that. Like I said before, the length, it is kind of a long game to play all like in one sitting. It kind of feels like if you guys are going to put a save system in, make the game a bit longer to really make it like a more developed game, but also mix the stages up a little bit, because you're right when you guys said that the game does kind of get repetitive there toward the end because of that. It's like they made the game either like too long or too short depending upon how you looked at it. So
How Long to Beat says this game is about 6 hours long. That's insane for a game of this type.
Whereas most of the walkthroughs I saw on YouTube, like about an hour and a half. So
that's bananas.
I
can't imagine spending 6 hours.
Yeah. maybe the first time. Maybe the first time you're playing and not really sure what you're doing. So, yeah. So the ending.
Oh, I'm looking at the wrong game. This is Tin Star from 2014.
Yes.
Yeah, that's not this game.
Yeah, Tin Star's a bit hard to do research on, because not only was there another game with this name, there's also like a TV show that has this name.
Exactly.
As well to itself. But speaking about speaking about inspiration, the developers did say that they were very strongly inspired by the classic movie Westworld, 1973, which is like a Michael Crichton movie. Have you guys ever seen that?
Mm-mm.
It's a science fiction western thriller with androids like killing people. So pretty good movie. So yeah, the developers said they got a lot of inspiration like the game from that. So
wasn't there a recent TV show version of Westworld?
Yes, but that's more based upon like something else. So
got it. Something else by the same name.
Yes, to make it more confusing. So But yeah, so the three endings of this game, I do like the fact. So I do like the fact that there are 3 different endings. I just wish they weren't tied to like a point, the point system. So, So if you end up with less than $750,000, you get the bad ending. $750 to $1 million gives you the normal ending, and you want to see the best ending. The best ending, you have to get like $1 million, which can be very hard to get. Especially, because like you have to really like work on that. Not this game overly difficult. I think relatively speaking, most of the game's pretty easy. Minus a couple like boss fights and segments, but still trying to come up with that much money to get the best ending in the game is frustrating. I thought so. Do you remember which ending that you got originally, Chris?
Originally, I probably got the bad ending the first time I beat this game, but
yeah.
I definitely beat it a bunch of times when I was younger. But I don't know that I knew that there were multiple endings back when I was a kid, because nobody covered this game. It's not like there were strategy guides out there. or anything like that. I think I just stumbled across. I'm sure I stumbled across 2 endings at least.
Well, we can spoil this now. Since since actually, since actually the limitations of this game are well past expired. So, basically, as the game goes on, Tin Star is kind of is attracted to and trying to romance the mayor's daughter, Maria. So, at the end of the game, after he defeats the Black Oil Gang, he proposes to her. And what happens at that point depends upon your dollar amount. The bad ending of the game, she refuses to marry him. Period. Flat out, rejects him.
Definitely got that ending before.
The normal ending is the same in the sense that she rejects Tin Star, but she marries Mo instead.
I remember that one.
Who inherited $1 million like his brother's will. So,
yeah, I remember that.
However, if you have $1 million, not only will Maria agree to marry you, you find out that, shock of shock, she's actually blackmailed. And and then Tin Star asks, "Why were you doing that?" She's like, "Well, while I was wearing it, to learn your secrets because I didn't know you were really the best thing in this town or not." So, yeah, those are 3 endings. So.
I'm looking at the ending right now, and he literally ends it with, "And I would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for you meddling kids or robots." And then Tin Star follows up with, "Does this mean the wedding's off?"
So, a couple things. One, you were talking about reviews of this game. Nintendo Power in December of '94 actually had a 5-page spread. And while you guys were talking, I was going through that spread. They don't mention anything about the different endings. Nothing at all. They go through, they show you very few screenshots of what's going on. They go all the way to, the final day and basically leave it at, hey, there's a final showdown with Black Bart. And that's it.
I remember my friend had. I didn't have a subscription to Nintendo Power back then, but a friend of mine did, and I remember looking at that, and that was the most coverage I had ever seen on the game, and I didn't know there were multiple endings. I have a review sitting here in front of me, and if you don't mind, Greg, I'll do what I did last episode.
Nope, it's fine. Go ahead.
I've begun to really dislike Nintendo Power reviews just because they are so generic. And I understand they had a lot of games coming out and they probably had, X amount of staff that were doing all these. But Nintendo's latest Super Scope game tests your eye and your stamina in an arcade-like duel between you and the weirdest collection of rusting rustlers ever. Nintendo Power rewrites the history of the West in this month's review, which I found very interesting because this takes place in the East. So we already have an issue.
Kind of makes you wonder if they really played
right, exactly. The pluses was excellent graphics and lots of challenge. You can use a regular controller, the Super Scope, or the SNES mouse, which we talked about. The humorous story and good aiming control. The negative, which we also touched upon, was not a lot of variety of play. In spite of the many stages, it's a shooter, period. So, was it worth the $49.99 when it came out?
For me, absolutely. I was fascinated by the game, and for all of its faults, if a game has enough of a good personality for me, I'll overlook an awful lot of faults. If I can tell a game was made with love and has a certain degree of polish to it, I'll overlook an awful lot of faults. And that's what I did for this game.
Yeah.
So for me, it was well worth it.
I mean, in this time period, if I had a Super Nintendo and a Super Scope, I was and still am a sucker for light gun games. So I would have paid the $50. I probably would have, or I would have asked for this for Christmas or Hanukkah or my birthday. Either way, I would have gotten this game, and whether I would have enjoyed it then, I can't tell you, but I know that I absolutely hated the Menacer, so, there's that.
Yeah, the Menace are not
no,
great.
that you
Not
want
a
to talk
fan.
about accuracy? That's bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, so so Nintendo Power at the end of that review ended up giving the game like a 3.6 out of 5, which is like which is like middle average of the road review score. And actually most reviews of this game were middle of the road as far as the scores went. Curiously enough, even though the game did not come out in England, a lot of British magazines covered the game, probably because it was developed by a British company. So, so I'm looking. So most magazines that cover this game were British, which is why that you probably didn't see much coverage on this. But the scores, the scores anywhere from like 86%, 80%, 2.8 out of 5, 61%. That's the lowest score I found. 82%, 8 out of 10, etc., etc. GamePro, however, did cover this game. However, they also gave it, so they ended up giving it a 3.75 out of 5.
If I knew that, I would have looked up the GamePro review.
Yeah, I didn't know
But,
GamePro covered this.
Yep, they did. So that was the one big American magazine besides Nintendo Power that covered the game. So, and like I said before, most of the reviews you guys already covered very well. The strong and weak points of the game that the reviewers brought up, with one exception. And I thought about this also. A 2-player mode would have been great.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2-player co-op would have been cool.
Yeah, that would have been awesome. Like this game. Too bad I didn't have it. So.
That's a bummer. Yeah, no, that would have been great.
But the game's definitely fun. Whether or not like Joe was saying before, whether or not you enjoy it depends upon what kind of games you like playing, and what you actually have on hand to play it with. I mean, because I think like a physical copy of the game with like a super scope or a mouse pad is probably going to be the preferred way to play it. So if you enjoy shooters of the style worth playing, if you have kids, I think this is like a great kid game still. I think the humor and the gameplay really sits very well for kids. In fact, most reviewers mentioned the fact the game is like too easy for them because the game is kind of like made for kids. But yeah, this game still holds it very well for kids today, I think. So. Whether or not the game is very well put together, very well programmed. Not all the ideas hit, but I think whether or not that you enjoy it or not really depends upon what kind of games you do. You like playing and your tolerance level, pretty much in the end, I think.
Well said.
So, anything else you guys want to say about the game before we move on?
I'm looking for that GamePro review.
Let me see if I can find a link for it here for you.
I'm looking through the magazine right now, and the page cited is not the right page. So,
well, son of a
yeah, I own an entire the whole image catalog for GamePro and Nintendo Power. So,
okay, so this appeared in their March 95 issue. Does that help any?
Yeah, apparently that is one of the issues that has not been back cataloged, so I don't have it. Look at that. Oh, nope. Never mind.
Oh,
Okay. Hold on. You said March '95?
Yes, I actually have a scan of it like right here. I'll send you the link. So.
Yeah, actually, the years 90 to 95, I actually didn't unzip.
Oh, okay. It's not a huge write-up of the game.
It looks a little bigger than what Nintendo Power did, and considering that was their game.
This had that he used to be such a good boy Kirby ad for Avalanche and Dream Course. Oh my goodness.
Oh yeah, huh? Let's see. Cross cartoon robots with Old West. You get Tin Star. As Sheriff Tin Star, you command the cursor that controls a 6-shooter. Light-hearted in design, Tin Star's colorful, sharp graphics make watching this wacky western enjoyable. Cartoony noises added to the game's charm while effective sounds and update music enhance the humor. The challenge depends largely on your controller. The three that we discussed are easier to use than the control pad, the mouse, and the Super Scope, they're saying. Tin Star's comedic twist stands out, but the jokes don't change, and the game plays, again, repetitive. Greenhorn Desperados will find more pleasure here than experienced gamers. So...
Wow, I actually kind of remember this issue, but I don't think I ever noticed it had a 10-star review in it because I was obsessed with Killer Instinct.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Well,
Killer Instinct
yeah.
would have been the story for this issue.
I remember
you could
reading this cover story and then it being followed by the Jaguar
Yeah.
CD ad and thinking like, man, I should get a Jaguar someday. And
Well, you can be forgiven for missing it because for missing this review too, because it's like the review covers like 1/4 of one.
yeah,
page,
it's tiny.
So,
Like,
yeah, so
there was a whole thing on Weapon Lord. Like, yeah, I totally remember this issue, and I don't remember there being being a review for 10-star, and I just don't remember it at all.
yeah,
Fascinating.
So that was, yep. So that's the besides the Nintendo Power, this is the one major U.S. magazine that covered the game. So, but yeah, but like Nintendo did not push this game very much. So. That's why I never heard of it. And I heard of it, and why I guess a lot of people I never heard of it. So, which is a shame because the game, faults aside, the game probably should have done better than it did.
I agree with that.
So,
I mean,
but,
you've seen that poster though, right?
yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
There's a little link to a picture of it. And you can see 10-star right under Illusion of Gaia, and I remember when these. Ever since the NES days, when they released those posters, I was like, all right, this is my checklist. I got to try all these games. And this poster right here, man, this is nothing but hits for me. I'm a little less warm on the sports games, though. Stanley Cup was really wild back in the day, man.
I don't. I did not know Nintendo published that. Did they? Huh.
Yeah, it's Stanley Cup and Major League Baseball. Yeah, they did those. And God, Super Punch Out. I think this was the first time I had seen Super Punch Out too, and was like, "Oh my God, it's Bear Hugger, and he looks so good." And then I went out. It's like I saw Unirace. It's like, I don't know what it is, but it's on the list. I'm gonna try it, and thank goodness I did because that game rules.
Such a good game.
That game's it's Stunt Race FX. I love that game. That game is so confusing, man, because it's like it shouldn't work as well as it does because that frame rate is atrocious, but it feels like once you get the hang of it, the game's really good. And I would love to have some sort of remake of that. They'll never revisit that game in a billion years. I mean, the fact that it's on Switch at all is kind of crazy to me to begin with, but still, like I would love for them to revisit that one. But you know what? We live in a world where Metroid Dread exists, so everything's on the table. And I say this every handful of years. Remember when Kid Icarus Uprising came out? Like, we got a third Kid Icarus game. Literally anything is possible. I can't count Nintendo out on anything. 6 months from now, they'll be dropping, like, Illusion of Gaia HD. Like,
Next E3, they're going to be announcing another Snow Bros game.
and it's about time. Come on, Capcom. What have you been working on, huh?
Yeah, Resident Evil remakes.
I was going to say Street Fighter 7, whatever they're up to.
Give us that gritty Snow Brothers
Right.
reboot. That's what I want.
Tetris 2 is on here. Damn, I forgot about that game. Talking about games I forgot about.
And I love the Super Nintendo version of Tetris too.
Not played it actually. I'll have to check it out.
Oh, it's super wild. I could do a whole episode on that one. The visual style in that game is insane. Every stage takes place inside of this house. So like you're seeing on the screenshot there is the multiplayer mode that takes place inside of two fish tanks.
I have played the NES Tetris 2. Like, is that the same game?
It's effectively the same game, but there's more modes in this one, and the visual style is, I guess, the NES one is all that like kind of Mayan or Egyptian or whatever kind of look to it. I want to say more Mayan because it's got like birds and stuff on it. But this one is all this. They've got these really goofy, silly cartoon interludes where like people do some like these little goofy looking dudes do slapstick humor, and like I said, they take place throughout a house. Like if you do puzzle mode, the play field is inside of a mug of root beer, and this one takes place inside of a pair of fish tanks that are like in a room somewhere. Like it all kind of ties together like these weird interpretations of a cartoon house. It's such a cool take on that game. It's my favorite version of it.
Okay. All right. Well, all right. I'll check that out then. Thanks. But
also a cheap one. That is not an expensive Super Nintendo game.
Sure. So just about 10 star up here. There are several codes and secrets that this game has. So we will cover those like real quickly. There's a code, for example, if you want to. This is only for cosmetic effect only. But if you want to, you can change 10 stars color before you play the game if you wish. By the title screen, just push A, B, X, or Y, and then hit start. And depending upon which button you hit, that will change 10 stars color to play the game. You either can make them blue, normal color, silver, or teal.
Huh.
So you have that ability.
Why?
Cosmetic effect only. I mean, okay, the kind of thing they charge you like $5 for these days, but they, there's also a way to make the knock 'em down mini game instead of every day a bit easier if you want to. If you wait 10 seconds, the message on the screen changes to shoot target. Then at that point, if you shoot the bottle, the screen will go up and fly a target will appear instead. Shoot the target as many times as you want to, you earn a whole bunch of cash. So that's one way to be able to game the system, to be able to earn some money some money toward the best ending of the game if you wish. So there is that. Pricing on eBay. We mentioned before about pricing. This game, despite the fact that it's not very popular, probably because it's not very popular, it's pretty cheap to pick up these days by Super NES standards. 51 copies of the game are currently listed on eBay. 33 copies of the game that are recently sold. These prices include shipping, card only. So prices of the game range anywhere from $10 to $36. So. Not that bad of a pricing. CIB is pretty affordable too, anywhere from $17 to $50. So, not an expensive game to pick up, really, because because when a mint copy of the game, complete and everything, goes to the same price the game originally sold for.
Yep,
that's a good price.
Absolutely.
Yeah, kind of a shame, but anyway, the game didn't sell better, but on the bright side, like I said before, it is pretty affordable, and also I guess because the fact it wasn't very popular, it's never gotten re-released. It's not available. It's not available like any of the virtual systems or formats or anything. So you either gotta buy the physical copy or emulate it. But
so I mean, good news for Super Nintendo collectors who are looking for a hidden gem. I mean, this one's been under the radar forever, and
true.
It's a pretty decent game. It's not going to change your life, but it's certainly one of the more interesting games that you can get for a relatively decent price.
Yeah, and the value is probably going to triple after being on this podcast.
Oh yeah, definitely. We are the trendsetters.
So, Chris, since we're talking about how this is like a great kids game, have you played this one? So have you played this one to like your kids?
Honestly, no. This one hasn't come up yet. We play a lot of games. This one just hasn't been one of the ones that's popped up. Like, you know what, we're gonna play Tin Star. I've definitely put their hands on a handful of some of the wackier stuff. Like maybe a couple of months ago, I showed them Donkey Kong Jungle Beat, and they were like, "This is amazing! Like, this is so cool." We busted out last summer. We were all stuck in the house for during COVID times. It was all right. I'm going to introduce you to the Power Pad. Let's play some world class track meet. And we played that a bunch. Like there were just a lot of days where can we go play the running game? Sure. Unfortunately, Short Order and Explode, which is my favorite Power Pad game, they weren't quite there for that yet. Because Short Order is basically Simon, and they can only they weren't able to get their hands on. They weren't able to get a hang on it. And what was it? Explode was just too hectic for them.
Sure. Yeah.
But yeah, Tin Star hasn't come up yet. I'm certain that it will at some point because everything will eventually. It's.
Yeah.
But no, this one hasn't been played with the children yet.
Yeah. Well, if we do break it out, let us know how they enjoyed it because it seems like this game was aimed primarily as a kids game. Maybe one reason it didn't like sell very well. So I think it should still hold up pretty well, kids. Kids these days. So.
Yeah, it's got that, like, I mentioned, like, the Tick. Like, it definitely came out during that time when that brand of irreverent cartoon was really prevalent, like the Tick or the Earthworm Jim cartoon or Eek the Cat, and this would have fit right in there. And I've always been surprised that this didn't get more of a following because of that, because it's that similar kind of humor. It's the character designs are very, very cool and interesting. It's a bummer that it didn't catch on.
Yeah, no, I agree definitely for sure. But anyway, that pretty much like covers that up. I'm not sure if I'd go. So I'm not sure like if I'd go quite so far as calling it a hidden gem. It's definitely but definitely like a good game that deserves more attention than than it's currently getting.
It's
so,
like a hidden turquoise.
Okay, that'll work. But so anyway, want to thank you again, Chris, for being on the podcast. I love having you on here.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
If you have any questions, comments, feedback, suggestions for more games, etc., feel free to either leave us a comment on our Facebook page, or you can also email me directly at the SNES podcast at yahoo.com. Joe, how can the listeners?
You can find me on Twitter at JOESUX30, or I have a very public Facebook that you can come find me at.
Yes. Yep, definitely. So, Chris, which podcast are you currently doing these days? I can't keep track of which ones are active anymore. So.
Well, that's my mission, is that if I ever do a podcast, I will keep it active. So all my shows are active. Weekly is the Stone Age Gamer podcast. It's where I talk about video games with one of my best friends, Dan. We do it every week. It's the world of video games told from the perspective of a couple of 40-year-old dudes. I have twice a month you'll get episodes of the Wave Back Music podcast, which is the video game podcast that I mentioned on here earlier. It's me and my friend Matt, and we listen to and discuss video game soundtracks. The other 2 weeks of the month, I'm on a TV show podcast called This Week's Episode with my wife and my other friends Evan and Angie, and we talk about different TV shows, and I nerd out about Star Wars a lot because there's a lot of Star Wars on TV. I just started a once-a-month podcast, honestly, just to have an excuse to talk to a couple of my favorite people once a month. My friends Paul and Sean, we do a podcast about movies called A Theater Near You, where we go alphabetically. So each month we pick a new movie based on a different letter that starts with a different letter of the alphabet. So last episode was the A-Team, and then the next episode is going to be Bill and Ted Face the Music. So we just keep that rolling, and we'll see where that lands. Those are the podcasts that I'm on.
So I was thinking. So I'm sorry. Maybe I got you confused with somebody else, or maybe somebody else like your network, because you are part of a network as well.
Yeah.
I thought at one point that you guys. So I thought at one point that you also did a wrestling podcast.
That was not me. Our channel hosted a couple of different wrestling podcasts. We hosted.
Okay, that's it then.
Yeah, Tiger Driver 91 for a while. Those guys are no longer with Geekade, and they're. I don't even know if they're actually still podcasting. Super cool guys, Fredo and Carlos. I love those guys. But yeah, they didn't do that. We also had a wrestling YouTube show called Ring the Bell, which was. I'm not a wrestling fan, but even I thought that show was hilarious. But it involved a lot of production, and they just kind of had to stop doing it. And then Dan, my co-host on Stone Age Gamers, started a wrestling podcast called Backdrops and Body Slams. I think it ran for a whole 2 episodes before he gave up. So there's a lot of those things happen on our site from time to time. Somebody will be like, "I'm going to start this podcast." I'm like, "Are you going to do it? Like, are you going to keep it going?" And then 3 episodes in, it just disappears, and they always make me sad. But I have for better or worse stuck it out with every show I ever started. Yeah, awesome.
So I first found you, like a Story Gamer podcast, the one you do with Dan, which is which was excellent content. I believe that was one of several podcasts I found when the whole Coleco Chameleon fiasco broke out.
Oh boy, yeah.
I think that's how I first I think that's how your podcast first came to my attention. So, but
That system made me mad.
Well, yeah. Have you listened to our review of Smoke and Mirrors yet? That we covered like several episodes back.
No.
We're checking out. Joe and I disagree about the book, but I thought the book was amazing to read. So, so definitely, if you're just learning more about that, give our podcast a listen about that, and then the book itself is very cheap to pick up as well if you want to. So, so. Okay, great. Dan does excellent quality stuff. I've listened to his stuff for several years now, so I definitely highly recommend checking out the Gallus podcast. So, and way back music makes me very happy because video game music does not get the respect that it deserves, I think. So, anything that anybody covers video game music in depth is I'm all over that stuff for sure. So. But I'm still waiting for you guys to cover. I'm still waiting for you guys to cover some of the favorite game soundtracks. But I understand there's a lot of choices out there to listen to. So.
Well, what's your suggestion? Let me throw it on the list.
So one of the more underrated soundtracks, I think. As far as we're talking about Super NES stuff. And of course, right now the name of the game just flew out of my head. Gemfire, the Koi game. That is a really, really good soundtrack. It's amazing how good that soundtrack is. But I mean, Koi usually get music in their games, but it's the music was so good they actually. They actually gave the music live orchestra treatment in Japan. So you have both versions of that available on YouTube, both the regular game version and also the orchestra version with Japan. But yeah, it's a very good, very underrated soundtrack. And I was just talking about this, and so also I was just talking with a friend about this the other day. The game sucks, but Predator for the NES also has a great soundtrack. I thought. It's a really good soundtrack, seriously. But too bad the game itself is not very good. But the music in that game is just awesome.
For NES, you said?
Yes.
Okay, they've been added to the list. We have this gigantic list of episodes that we want to do. Our current schedule is pretty full because we decided to dedicate it to a bunch of the anniversaries that are happening this year.
True.
So, because there's so many of them, so we're gonna do a special for Donkey Kong, a special for Metroid, F-Zero, Crash Bandicoot, Outrun, the Castlevania. We always do a Castlevania in October anyway, so it's keeps going and going. But they have officially been added to the list of future episodes for one of us to pull from. So.
Yeah, I mean, Super NES. I mean, of course, the bias to Super NES anyway, because Super NES has two of my favorite all-time soundtracks. Period. Super Castlevania 4, Actraiser. The music on those games is so good. It's probably my top 3 selection of game music. So.
Well, we did ActRaiser.
Yeah. So Super Castlevania 4 is just amazing soundtrack. It's so good.
Super Castlevania 4 is phenomenal. We're doing the Castlevania games in order, so we will get to it. We're on
eventually. Yeah.
This one is going to be. We're not that far out because we did Castlevania 3 last year, so this year is going to be Castlevania 2: Belmont's Revenge for Game Boy, to line up with its 30th anniversary, which will be in July, but we're going to hold off till October because we always do a Castlevania in October and then our spooky special. So I mean, Super Castlevania 4 can't be far behind that, right?
I don't think so.
I would imagine that it might be the next game.
The game came out in late '91. I'm not sure about the release order for all the Castlevania games, but it was an early Super NES game.
Yeah, it was one. I remember it was one of the earliest ones. I remember renting that thing. God, that game was awesome.
But yeah. So real quick, let me just ask you real quick here to finish things up. Castlevania 3, which also by the way, I think it's a great soundtrack.
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned before some of your way back episodes about how different the Japanese version of the soundtrack sounds. For some games like Zelda, because of the different hardware used. Do you have a preference toward either the American or Japanese version of Castlevania 3?
For Castlevania 3, I prefer the Japanese one, though I do think that this is one of those cases where people love to say, like, oh, the Japanese one just blows the NES. It's amazing. The NES one is garbage. This is the greatest thing. I'm like, ah! And it's like, okay, sure. The Japanese one I do overall consider to be better. It has, the more instruments and everything. But let's not take away from the American NES one, because they really accomplished a lot with the limited instrument set that they have.
Yes. Yeah.
Weirdly enough, I find the reverse to be true with Castlevania 2. I think even though Castlevania 2 was on the disc system, I think they fixed that soundtrack for NES. Not that it's bad on the disc system, but it sounds so much more, I guess, active on the NES one. There's more drums. It feels so much more energetic for the NES release, which is weird. I don't know, I have a weird relationship with disc system music, because like sometimes it's really cool, but sometimes it just sounds goofy. No.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I just prefer the American version, probably just because I'm just so used to hearing the American version, because that's the version that I grew up with. But it's kind of like with me, it's kind of like with me, like with Doom, because playing the game for years, I had a crappy old ad-lib sound card on my computer. So, so to me, the ad-lib version is the go-to version to listen to, because that's the one I grew up with. So that's the one that's one I'm most familiar with. Even though I know that there's several systems that have much better sounding Doom music on it. But
I'm sure there are, but for me, it was the basic MS-DOS one, which is why when they re-released that game on Switch and it had the DOS sound, they put the DOS soundtrack in there, not any of the fancy upgraded ones. It just sounds just like the crappy MIDI MS-DOS sounds. It's like, and thank you very much. Because that's what that game is to me. That's what I want.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah. Like, we better cut this off here, because otherwise we could talk about music for a much longer period.
Yeah, pretty much the rest of my life. I do want to just kind of throw in one more thing. I mentioned earlier that I write for Nintendo Force magazine. It is a physical magazine. It's the spiritual successor to Nintendo Power. It's run by people who've worked for Destructoid and IGN and whatnot over the years, and for some reason they let me write for them too. It's a really cool magazine. Every issue comes with an actual physical poster. Like, if you want that experience of getting a Nintendo magazine mailed to your house, this is the way to do it. It's super affordable, and I'm so proud of the work that we do there. It's super awesome. So there's my other major plug.
I know you write. Yes, I know you write. Yes, I know you write occasionally the website. Haven't you? Did you write for any other magazines in the past, or is it your first time actually writing for a magazine?
I've been writing. I was writing on Geekade, on our site that we created for the longest time, and then I got a job writing for Stone Age Gamer. So I do a weekly articles for them now.
Okay.
Instead of Geekade, which we've now just removed written content. We're just a podcast network now. And Nintendo Force, I've been writing for a couple of years, but only as like a freelance. And then last year, was it early last year or late the year before? I can't remember now at this point, but they put me on as a staff writer. So it's been the same magazine for a long time. I've never written for another publication officially before like that. So. Okay.
All right. Cool. All right. Awesome. Well, yeah, definitely. So check that out as well. I like for sure. So, but anyway, thank you again, Chris, for coming on this game, and also for bringing yet another game to the podcast that we've never heard about.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
But I cannot believe I actually missed this game, because '94 was like prime Super NES time. But for whatever reason, it just slipped on my radar. So, glad to have a chance to play it.
Yep. I'm glad you did too.
But so next time on the podcast, Joe's pick around this time. Joe, what do you have?
Negative.
Really?
Next time we record is with Ferg.
That's right. I forgot about that. Yeah.
Oh, Ferg's coming on. What's he talking about?
He surprised the heck out of us by picking a game I never heard of either. Speaking of like strange games.
And I
Surreal
know what
World Smash Ball.
I was just gonna say. I know he's gonna do that ball game, and I never remember the name of it. But yes, he told me about that game a while ago. It's super weird. It's really cool. It's kind of like Windjammers, I think. Like it's
Yeah, from the little I've seen of it, I've not played it yet, but from the little I've seen of it, it does kind of give me that depression. So it's like, and I'm like, you picked a sports game? Well, like WTF? Like what's going on?
I mean,
here?
I love
So,
Windjammers, so those could be good.
Yeah, this is a solid pick, and I mean, Ferg is just always a delight to talk to.
He is, yeah, definitely. So that'll be next time on the podcast. So look forward to that.
I will.
But alrighty, so thanks again. Thanks again, everybody, for listening to the podcast. As always, we appreciate it. Thank you again, Chris, for being on here with us. Very much, for taking time out of your busy life to join us here.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
And Joe, thanks again for joining me as always. And we'll catch you again next time. So, final thought. TinStar actually fits the TinStar is actually a very good name. Some of these games have terrible names.
Agreed.
TinStar's pretty on the nose.
It is, yeah. It's a great name. They did it. I mean, come on. They called his horse Aluminum. Hi ho, Aluminum, away. That's a solid gag, man.
It is.
That's good stuff.
Yeah, it is definitely, yeah. So, alrighty, gents and girls out there, thank you very much for listening as always. We appreciate it. So, catch you again next time. Stay safe. Be well.
Good night.
Later, all.
Good night.
At $200, a Super Nintendo setup costs twice as much as the old system. For the money, the company promises better pictures, sound, and adventure. Now you're playing with power, superpower. You're the king, I tell you! The king! Only for Super NES.
You're listening to the SNES podcast with your host, Soul Blazer.